I'm forced to recognize that largely due to Pierre Poilievre's campaign to frankly lie and misguide Canadians, it has become very unpopular.
Carney has made a deal with him that they will pretend that the carbon tax has been put aside until after the election. And then if they win, not only will they bring it back, they will raise it higher than ever before.
We will announce our full plan very soon. The plan should actually work, should actually reduce emissions. We want to make the big polluters pay, and we don't want to see the burden fall on working people.
Is Justin Trudeau's marquee climate policy, the federal consumer carbon tax, dead in the water? If the Liberal leadership race is any guide, it certainly seems that way, with frontrunners pulling away from either the planned April 1st increase or the tax altogether. And as we heard earlier in this show, Trudeau's own environment and climate change minister is now also ready to move on. And that's not the only marquee Liberal policy leadership candidates aren't game for. Bloomberg tonight is reporting former finance minister Chrystia Freeland would scrap a change to the capital gains inclusion rate she actually introduced herself in the last budget. Let's bring back the front bench. Saïd Salvem, Jamie Allerton, Carl Bélanger, and Hannah Thibodeau. Saïd, I'll start with you. Is the carbon tax a thing of the past? The consumer price on carbon, the consumer carbon tax.
My goodness, it definitely seems to be. I mean, this is something that the Liberals dug their heels in, specifically Prime Minister Trudeau, over the course of a year. And due to so much pushback, and due to the fact that there is an upcoming election, now there seems to be a change of heart. Canadians need to be able to trust their government. Canadians need to be able to trust their party. And it is very challenging now when the Liberals, at this point in a potential race, start to walk back their opinion on things like the carbon tax and the capital gains tax. It's going to be very difficult to get that trust back with voters.
Is it a trust problem, Carl, or is it a cutting your losses and hoping for the best moving forward kind of thing? Like, do they have any other choice?
Yeah, it's called the Hail Mary pass. You know, it's like, oh yeah, this policy is no longer popular. Instead of fighting for it, we'll do what the Conservatives say they will do. So we'll be what? Conservative light? Why would you go for that? This is the problem, right? Same with the capital tax gain policy. She brought it in just a few months ago. It's not that long ago.
It still hasn't even passed.
But
don't worry, the CRA is still collecting it. Actually, let me just play the clip of how she defended it, because in and of itself, it caused a huge, reaction among Canadians when she pronounced sort of the reason for it, as she does in this clip back in June. Have a listen to Chrystia Freeland.
But I would also like to ask Canada's 1%. In fact, Canada's 0.13% to consider this. What kind of a Canada do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a country where kids go to school hungry? Do you want to live in a country where a teenage girl gets pregnant just because she doesn't have the money to buy birth control?
I played that clip, Carl, because it's not Frank Baylis saying, wasn't a fan of these policies anyways. It's the person who was tasked with being the chief communications delivery agent for this policy now saying it's over.
Yeah, I guess it's something else she didn't agree with Justin Trudeau, and she still went forward.
Must have been testy those
must
days.
have been, but she stuck around until she couldn't. But by then it's too late. Like, the credibility that she brings to the table on this is nil. That's the hard part, because really, if this is a defining issue, the Conservatives have been on this. Same with the carbon tax, they've been on this, and now that you're trying to distance yourself from Justin Trudeau, you're going towards the Conservatives. So if people want change, will they believe that you can bring that change that they're seeking? I'm not sure it's going to work.
At the same time, unless you said something like, I'm getting rid of that, or the carbon tax, do you have a hope, Hannah, of convincing anyone that you can be that agent of change?
I think Pierre Poilievre and his communication skills has made the carbon tax a dirty word. And there's nothing that these hopefuls for Prime Minister, Liberal leader and Prime Minister can do, especially since we're likely to head into an election campaign, but distance themselves from that. And you even see Pierre Poilievre going a little bit, it's like, okay, tick, I've got this off my agenda. I have totally controlled this narrative. And on the front of his podium, he even uses jobs tax now, because now you have to figure if carbon tax is going to be taken off he can still play with it a little bit, as we heard in the clip there. But if you want to have new slogans, new issues that Canadians are really focusing on, they're really focusing on the issue of jobs right now because of what we're seeing in the United States. So you see a little transition even from Pierre Poilievre moving from, a carbon tax election to a jobs election. And that's something that, for him, he has to do, but he's got the carbon tax issue, and he won that. Tick off his list.
But I guess the question is twofold in a way. Like, can two things be true, Jamie? That there's going to be a ton of pushback on people like Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney, who have in the past expressed support for these policies and are now backing away from them. At the same time as the Conservatives a month ago thought they'd run an election on that stuff, and they're still going to try to, but it might not be as easy as it was.
Yeah, I'm actually going to sharply disagree with Hannah on this one. I think the carbon tax election as a frame continues to have a lot of mileage for Pierre Poilievre, and I'll tell you why. This is still Government of Canada policy. Canadians had their money, some of it rebated back to them, landed in their deposit in bank accounts last week. Canadians continue to pay it. If the Liberal government currently in power wants to call Parliament back to scrap the carbon tax and make it effective February 1, I suspect they'll find support in the House for such an initiative, but they haven't done it. So it's still very much a Canadian policy. And so every time Pierre Poilievre attacks the carbon tax and puts a frame on a carbon tax election, it's giving Canadians some certainty. In an era where there's so much uncertain as a result of what's happening south of the border, you can be certain Pierre Poilievre is going to scrap a carbon tax. And when you ask them, well, are Canadians tired of hearing about it? He'll probably pivot and say, Canadians are tired of paying it, and they're tired of doing this, and they're tired of doing that. And he gives them an opening to really unpack a vision. So in an era with so much political instability, Pierre Poilievre, by continuing to advance the carbon tax election frame, is able to inject a lot of certainty, give something very concrete that he can actually do, and so much about is beyond his control right now, and build a frame to continue to make the case as to why he should lead for Canadians.
But don't you think the message, though, no, Jamie and I going back and forth, but don't you think the message, though, for Canadians right now, they're not worried about the carbon tax as much. They're worried about what's happening down south. You implement those 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, there are going to be jobs lost. There are going to be, we're already hearing that what it would cost the economy, the GDP, that really people's minds are flipping because it's events, and events can change a narrative. And it seems the narrative has gone maybe, and carbon tax can still be a part of that narrative, but I think a lot of people sitting at home are going, I'm really worried about what this agent of chaos in the United States is going to do to our country.
Carl, I think there's a few things that are like the what ifs there, right? Like there's still, we don't know that the election is going to happen for certain in the spring. It seems very likely, but we don't know 100%.
Right.
We don't know that the tariffs will come February 1st, even though they're threatening them. Maybe they will, maybe like a lot of, if that all falls into place, if there's an election in April or May and the tariffs come February 1st and we're in a recession at that time, I think Hannah's 100% right. People will be worried about what Donald Trump is doing and what the response is like. If we avoid all of that, goodness willing, then perhaps the conversation turns back to a sharp focus on affordability, which obviously Poilievre has been successful at.
He's been successful, but there's more room for maneuver for the other candidates on that front, because they're going to have proposals that going to involve probably a lot of money in spending and programs. But when it comes to the carbon tax, lots of things we don't know. The carbon tax is dead. We know that now. There's no way this is going to survive. Even the NDP was kind of pulling away. Jagmeet Singh was like uncertain about it. And it's sad really because, the concept of carbon pricing really, the genesis of it comes from the right wing of the political spectrum. It was a conservative idea to put the market, to put a price on pollution. We've seen it in the acid rain debate with Mulroney. We've seen it in other jurisdictions. But now, as Anna outlined, it's become a dirty word. The framing has been such that we can't go back there. The question is, what will the next plan be? Because right now, we don't know what Pierre Poilievre will do in terms of fighting climate change and pollution. We don't know.
We have no plan from the Conservatives, and we don't know any of the details of any of the Liberal leadership candidates either. And, good times ahead in that vein. All right, I got to leave it there. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate the discussion. Our front bench, Saïd Salvam, Jamie Allerton, Carl Bélanger, and Hannah Thibodeau.